Hi, and welcome to the Clean Your Toilet podcast. My name is Jim Livingston. I'll be your host for this episode. I'm a master certified coach. I'm a team coach, and I've been developing leaders around the world for probably the best part of the last sort of 15 years. My guest today is Ming. Ming, could you please introduce yourself to everyone?
Hi, I'm an inner work specialist. I am also a teacher of personal mastery. Thank you.
So Ming, our topic today is all around diversity, inclusion, equitability, so DEI as it's popularly known. We've noticed, particularly over the last 6 months, there's been a pretty significant shift, political shift and also a corporate shift. If you think about the political landscape, the Trump administration's come in has been quite critical, quite cynical about DEI, threatening legal action against DEI initiatives. So that in itself has been one big major political shift. Then also on the corporate shift, we're seeing a lot of organizations starting to scale back, starting to rename, transform, even remove many of their DEI initiatives. If I was to give you some examples, Meta, Amazon, Disney, Boeing, Target, McDonald's, Walmart, Harley Davidson, Warner Brothers, Netflix, Twitter, X, and Goldman Sachs.
There's a lot.
Are examples of some organizations that have made some fairly significant changes to their DEI initiatives. What are your thoughts around all this?
I'm just wondering at this point, what will be the state of the world in the coming 5 years, coming 10 years, coming 20 years, with companies dismantling this structure that has been in place, over the years. We talk about diversity, diversity means, being open to different individuality, embracing and allowing people to shine their own way, to be unique in their own way. Equality, one of the big topic that we talk about, given how it brought about, this whole feminist movement itself. And of course, one of the things that we were discussing just now was really about, where does it leave men in the equation?
Yeah. Would you like to say a bit more about this?
I'm stewing.
So if you think about all these changes that are happening right now, what does it mean for people that are out there? I mean, how are people feeling about all these changes, particularly those people that might be in those groups that are particularly affected by all these changes?
I'm not sure, really. What do you feel? What are you observing?
I'm observing different things from different groups of people. I'm seeing some people are actually pro a lot of these initiatives, pro removing a lot of these initiatives. And there's a lot of people that are anti removing a lot of these initiatives. And everyone seems to have their own sort of thoughts around whether they're good or bad changes. What do you think about it?
It really depends which level, which scale we're looking at as an impact itself. If you're looking in the individual, then we must look into people who reside in the company itself. Let's say, a company framework. And how does that impact, the life of the individuals who are workers down there? And then, of course, the people who are managing the upper management itself, how does it impact the upper management? And then from there, we can really see it. So I don't come from a corporate background, so I can't really tell for sure. But this issue around diversity, inequality has been coming up, in process work, in the recent, cases of clients that we work with. And, there's always this feeling unequal, feeling that not heard, not unaccepted, as a core issue that keeps coming up. So I do notice a trend.
What do you think's the root cause of all these underlying feelings and emotions that people have around inequality, being excluded?
It's like you feel far away from the world. It's like that kind of trance state, that brings you further and further and further away. And you just feel very much, disconnected with yourself, with all the walls, around your relationships. And then you are the only one in that whole big space. Where does it leave them? Lost. LOST and also LOSS.
So they've lost something, but they're also feeling lost.
Yeah. Actually, what do you think about this? Let's have it as a conversation.
As I said, everyone's got a different agenda. I mean, there is a group of people in the world that want more, that want to be included more, want to have bigger seats at the table, and there are a group of people that, want to be heard more, that are not feeling heard. I think that's a real issue, do people actually recognize me for who I am, how I contribute, the value that I add? And I'm not really seeing that happening a lot.
And how does that impact you? Why does this whole thing, drive you? I know you're so passionate around this.
So if I look at all the conversations I have with clients over the years, I'm seeing quite a few things. There's conversations with women that are trying to sort of succeed, and they feel like they're constantly being pushed back.
Yeah.
So I think there's a fair group of women, and rightfully so. There's been a lot of challenges for women, progressing. Right. That said, there's a lot of women out there that have been very successful in progressing and have been able to sort of break through whatever barriers might be in front of them. Right. I'm seeing something that's coming up quite a lot now is how a lot of males are feeling insecure. And, I think this is something that's coming up more and more frequently is, if you think about all the messaging that's out there, a lot of the messaging has been males are to blame. And a lot of males are starting to feel quite ostracized and quite ignored.
By whom?
Well, by the corporate world, by society as a whole. There's a societal movement. There's obviously an industry movement as well. So I think there's both of those that's impacting a lot of males. So where do you think DEI is going wrong?
Actually, I'm very curious. When was it established?
I don't know when there was a date for DEI.
Because we talk about days just now, International Men Day, International Women Day, Pride Day. When was DEI established? When was it formally, introduced? Was it in the 1940s?
I'm really not sure.
We can check it out.
I don't know. When was DEI initially? I mean, I don't think there's like a formal start date for DEI.
Let me just read out what I've just found. DEI movement can be traced back to the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century, with significant legal milestones emerging in the 1960s. It began to emerge between 1940 to 1950, where activists fought against racial segregation and discrimination.
Yeah, you can see that it dates back to that. But that was more societal. Wasn't as much about workplace. That was more about, the men and women in the poppy fields that were being treated as slaves. I think that's where it really started. A lot of it. It was much more than that. It even started with what's the Black American activist? What was her name? The lady who stood on the white side of the bus. Because back then, blacks and whites were segregated on buses, right? Blacks was put to one side, whites were put on another, and she dared to sit. I forgot
the bus. That area.
Yeah. I mean, but that was...
You're talking about Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. That would have been Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
So I think, it can be traced back throughout time.
I think it was during then, 1940 to 1950. That was where the activists,
that's
of
where it became really a big movement.
It's like a hotspot.
It was a big movement, but it was not necessarily about the corporate world. It was about society in general. And it was about how society in general segregates people and how people were viewed as lesser or more valuable than others.
Because of the skin color.
Because of your skin color or because of where you came from.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, even though, we live in a different world today, this is also one of the big undercurrent.
It's still prevalent. I mean, Nazi Germany had the same thing with the Jews. There's always been throughout history, there's always been this issue around who's better or who's worth more or who's right or who's wrong. And we've seen that throughout society, dating back for a century. In fact, you go back even further.
You're talking about Native Americans, the white people.
Well, yeah, Native Americans, white people, but I think that was more about land at the time and dominating and conquering, and that was the way things worked back then. But even if you go back in time to who were slaves, who were not slaves, who did the Egyptians use to build all the pyramids? It was slaves, not Egyptians. Who did the Romans use to build a lot of the stuff? I mean, it was not Romans. So I think, if you look back throughout history, there's always been the haves and have-nots. There've always been people discriminated against for whatever reason. So it's not something that's new. It's just us as human beings, we're not as tolerant as we probably should be towards other people. And I think it's that lack of tolerance and ignorance that is still, even to this day, it's still there.
Mind if I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What about your personal experience,
Bias, prejudice is there no matter what. It's not just skin color. It's not just your sexual preferences. It happens on everything. I mean, I'm a big guy. I mean, the reality is there's always going to be people that look at you and say, oh, you can't do this because you're fat, right? These are all factors. I mean, human beings as a species, we judge people.
And how do you deal with that?
How do I deal with it personally?
Yeah.
Well, I've kind of learned that, people can judge me. If they judge, they judge. I'm going to treat people how I believe, which is I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care what your culture is. I don't care whether you're straight, whether you're not. Doesn't bother me, male or female. I treat everyone as equal. And I appreciate the fact that everyone has something special to add. Everyone has something of value to contribute. And everyone inherently, I think, is inherently a good person, but because of society, we do tend to have these sorts of changes. Yeah. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I just was thinking, as you were sharing, even in Singapore itself, this is quite a big issue. Even it is like an unsaid thing, we judge and we label people based on their skin colors and based on their races. Even the way, if you look at the urban planning, even the way people are being segregated.
Absolutely. Well, you got the quota. I know this very well because we're selling a house right now, and because of the quota system, we're under the others. And does that quota system in our housing, does it mean that we're more interconnected as a society?
Correct. Which brings around a lot of dialogues around the state of the country. We talk about democracy, but are we really practicing it? We talk about meritocracy, but are we really a meritocratic country?
Can you name any country that's a meritocratic country?
Say that again.
Can you name any country that is a meritocracy?
I think we try to be, but there's a difference between being one and preaching as one.
I think every country tries it. Australia, I think, is probably one of the closest to it.
Yeah.
In the sense that, doing what's right for the country, unfortunately, it's very hard because there's always pockets of society that, don't want that. And, because of those pockets of society, Australia doesn't progress as much as it should do. So I think that's a very real thing for so many people.
How do you feel towards the polarization?
I think one of the things that needs to change is society as a whole being more understanding of one another. I think caring needs to change. I remember my first day in Singapore, and it was my first day in Singapore. This was 25 years ago. And I went into the office and I sat down with my colleagues in the office. And, one of my colleagues, Chinese lady, she said, what do you do if you come across a snake, right? A snake and an Indian, and you have a stick, right? And you hit the Indian. I don't understand the joke to this day. But
I don't either.
But everyone seemed to find it really, really funny. Maybe I butchered the joke. But the point is that, although it was a joke that was very much against Indians. Yeah. Because of their skin color. Also on my first day in Singapore, I was told that, Indians spell and Malays are lazy. This is what was told. When people laugh at stuff like that,
it means that they come to accept,
they come to accept
kind of narrative.
Yeah. And I think this is something that needs to
be addressed.
That needs to change.
That needs to be brought to the surface, awareness. So it's not funny.
It's not funny, but you know what? There's a lot of people that will sit there and laugh at it, right? Which tells you, what does it tell us about society as a whole?
That we can hurt somebody verbally and we don't realize how cutting edge our words can be.
We don't realize it. Or we can say that we believe in, DEI, but we don't really act that way.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's a fundamental shift that, as a species, we need to sort of, we need to mature a bit and I think be more accepting.
How do you feel that, as an individual, we can conduct ourselves with more DEI practice, given, the new administrative that's happening in America? So it's definitely going to affect many different companies around the world stepping in or stepping out.
So let's be clear about the new administration. I mean, the Trump administration doesn't really represent America. It represents a very small pocket of America. Not that I'm American, right? And let's be really honest. We can't blame Donald Trump for this because a lot of these corporates had actually been changing their DEI initiatives and removing their DEI initiatives before Trump came into power. It's just Trump sort of tried to legalize, and that became the center of attention. I think there's a fundamental reason around why organizations are shifting away from DEI initiatives. And I think that reason is that a lot of DEI initiatives have been failing. We spend a lot of money on trying to educate people about DEI, but are we actually seeing any real change? And I think this is one of the fundamental problems is we're not necessarily seeing the change for the right reasons.
Why do you think that's happening?
I think the way we do DEI is wrong.
Tell me more.
So let me give you 3 dates. 8th of March, 26th of June, 28th of November. What do you think is significant about those 3 dates?
International Women's Day.
International Women's Day, 8th of March.
Pride Day.
Pride Day, LGBTQ Day on 26th of June, yep.
International Men's Day that we don't really talk about.
International Men's Day, 28th of November.
And it falls on the same month as Mental Health Month.
Mental Health Month, that's right. How many posts did you see people make about International Men's Day?
Rarely a lot of likes either. People are so much focused on the first 2.
I saw 3 in Singapore.
You saw 3?
Yeah, and I was one of them, right? How many posts have we seen around Pride Day or particularly International Women's Day?
10,000.
I've lost count. Every second post is International Women's Day.
Yeah.
So I think coming back to the question, where's DEI going wrong? I think we're going wrong because a lot of DEI practices are actually going against what DEI stands for. Just the nature of celebrating one over another is discriminatory. Right? If we're not going to treat people, if this is about treating people equally, then there needs to be enough stuff, not just for women, but also for men. We need to be celebrating women in business, but also men in business. And I think this is part of the problem, is that a lot of the time we're being told men are bad, men are to blame, men are the reason why there's a ceiling for women.
But is that really true?
It's a great question. I mean, 70% of HR are female. If 70% of HR industry is female, why are there not more women in senior leadership roles?
Interesting.
And I think it's a very big question. I don't know what the answer is for this. Is it that HR isn't really valued? That I'm not sure of. That's the really big challenge. What are your thoughts around it?
Ask me the question again.
What are your thoughts around the fact that 70% of HR people are women, but we don't have more women particularly in STEM roles, tech industries like that?
Yeah, you don't really see that in the tech industry. You see more men. Most of the banking industry, you see more men as well.
Why?
Good question.
But in nursing, we see the opposite.
Females.
In nursing, it's mostly females.
Yeah, even school teaching, you see more females.
School teaching, predominantly females.
Nurses, medical industry, you see more females than men.
Yeah. So what's the reason for, and I think this comes back to the point about where DEI is going wrong. It's not about having quota systems. It's about how do we invite people in to build careers? How do we invite people into our organizations so that they can grow and learn? How do we invite them in to be part of a community? How do we get them involved? How do we create opportunities for them without ostracizing others? And I think that's the really big challenge. I think puts a lot of extra pressure on HR in the sense that recruitment, we've got to be a bit more intentional about in terms of reaching out to women, right? But it has to be done the right way. I'll give you an example on this. I was reading a post recently about a lady who runs a STEM organization here I think it's in Singapore. And her hiring practice is that when a woman applies for a job, she automatically goes through to the interview round. And I thought about this for a second. I'm like, well, that in itself is part of the problem. You're putting someone in the role because of they're female, not because they're the right person for the job, not because they're the right fit, not because they can do the job better than anyone else, just purely to fill a quota. And I think that in itself is a huge issue, right? I mean, recruitment should be very transparent. How we pay people should be transparent. How we promote people should be transparent. And I think these are some of the areas where organizations are going really wrong with DEI initiatives.
So in DEI, we talk about those practices. We come up with frameworks. We come up with mind maps, structures. But are those structures tested to be efficient and effective? Because it feels more like a theory paper based.
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, let's be realistic. I can have 50% men and 50% women, and I can be no more diverse than if I had 90% men and 10% women. If they're all the same type of people, if they all think the same, act the same, that's not diversity, right? Diversity is when you get different thinking, different ideas, different cultures, different backgrounds coming together, sharing their thoughts and ideas that are all very different personalities. That's real diversity. It's not a gender. It's not a sexual preference. And I think we need to start looking at how we hire people, right? Making sure that we are starting to look for that diversity in how we hire, but hiring for the right reasons.
And even before we talk about hiring people, I think it's important for us to look into ourselves. Where do we stand in this? Where's our biasness? Where in our life do we promote all this inequality? And
this is a really good point is, and maybe this is where that space for inner work is, particularly in recruitment and in hiring people and how we, even down to performance reviews and how we promote people. Are we really trying to remove bias from those processes? Right? Because if we're really trying to remove bias from those processes, then we've got to start getting different viewpoints and different perspectives.
Having more awareness of the existing inequality, having more awareness of the lack of diversity that's happening, even though we say one thing, but we don't do what we say.
Yeah. But it goes even further than that. It's not just about having awareness, because I think everyone's aware that there is less women in industry than there is men. Right? It's not about awareness. It's about acceptance.
Acceptance of?
It's about accepting that whether you're male or female, or whether you're a different culture, whether you've got different sexual preferences, you can do amazing things. Accepting that your skin color, your gender doesn't determine whether you're going to be a great contributor to an organization. Right? There is zero science to say that because someone is a particular gender, they're going to be better than someone else. Right? There is zero science to say that because you're male, you're going to be better at making decisions, or you're going to be better at this, or better at, or stronger or more aggressive. I mean, many of the female leaders I know are very assertive and are very aggressive. Right? Every single person on this planet has the ability to think, behave, act, in a way that they feel appropriate. So I think this is where that bias is coming in. There's a lot of biases. There's a lot of judgments. We tend to put a lot of people in boxes and say that because you're this type of person, you're going to be like this. But we know that's rubbish.
Yeah. And there's an expectation that we think we know that they should act in a particular way.
Absolutely right.
It becomes a natural assumption of how we conduct ourselves.
So one of the common ones is that, this is one of the common ones we hear, is that men are more reckless.
Is that true?
It's a really great question.
Because I've seen females who are really reckless.
We've seen females that are really reckless. We've seen males that are really reckless. We've seen females that are really empathetic. We've seen males that are really empathetic.
And why should it be divided based on our sexuality, based on our gender, based on our race?
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. And I think this is one of the real big problems that we have.
And then this is where it becomes really interesting, because I'm thinking about the rank structures. because inequality fundamentally was caused by displacing power.
Yes.
So we can't look into this issue and talk about this issue without understanding the rank structures that's set up in the society and the frameworks, that holds it together.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look back throughout history, right, the whole DEI initiative, stemming back to the civil rights movement, if not before, even back throughout history, has always been about the haves and have-nots.
Yeah.
Right? The haves don't want to let go of what they have, right? And the have-nots want what the haves have. That's always been an issue throughout time.
And it's interesting also, I thought, because at some point, Indians, for example, just when we were talking about Indians itself, at some point, they were the people, who were running the kingdoms.
Yeah.
If you look at the Hindu kingdom.
Look back throughout society, every race, pretty much, the Mongolians were at the top at one stage, the Romans were at the top at one stage, the Brits were at the top. Every society has gone through highs and lows. Every society has done things that they regret.
What if it's a wave?
I think it is constantly waving. I think it's a constant wave.
Power dynamics, rank structures.
Power dynamics change.
And I think the solution is really being aware of the rank structures that really exist. Because we can't say that it doesn't exist. We can't turn a blind eye to it and keep talking about fairness.
Absolutely right. It does exist. And I think the case for diversity is very, very clear, right? When you have a diverse workforce tied to profitability, it's, there's absolute correlation to say that a diverse workforce leads to better profitability.
We have to look into the oppressed and oppressor how are we contributing to this role?
It's a great question. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think that if we begin to look into this whole thing around the rank structures, we begin to see that there's always the role of the oppressed and the role of the oppressor itself. And throughout time, the test of time itself, we've been moving one role to another role to one. And I think the awareness is really how can we detach ourselves from all these roles so that we can allow ourselves to be liberated from these bindings and to be free to choose differently. Where does freedom of thought lies? Since we talk about freedom of expression, we don't really pause for a moment to really question the thoughts, the narrative that we were fed. Even as you were growing up, you grew up in a certain society, you believe that some people are less than. Where do all these assumptions came from? Where do all this narrative came from? From TV shows?
Yeah.
From your family, from the society, from what is being practiced in school.
So the narrative is really interesting because we can trace the narratives to so many different things. Let's go back to the male-female gender for a second, right? So there is a lot of, the narrative for a lot of men is, I'm expected to provide for my family. That's always been the narrative throughout history. As males, we are expected to be the breadwinners. We are expected to support our families. When a male and female, when a married couple separate, the courts automatically
grant the female.
Automatically will grant the female custody of a child.
Yeah.
The courts automatically will expect the male to be one of the biggest contributors.
Is this still true?
It's still very true to this day. And even though the Women's Charter is designed to be equal, it's not actually
equal.
It's not actually equal.
Just by the ruling, so you can tell the existing inequality.
That in itself is a part of the societal problem, right? So I think we've got to look back at these narratives and where they come from, and we've got to really challenge some of these narratives, right? If I look at my household, for example, my wife works, I work. Our son goes to school. My wife and I both share and divide looking after our son. We both make sure that we do a lot. I do, in my household, I do all the cooking. My wife does most of the cleaning. I do some of it. I'm the taxi driver, but my wife also plays a very important role. So we share that equally. But that's in two working parents.
Equality. How can we practice equality? How can we, even in our daily relationship with our family, our spouse?
Absolutely.
How can we start practicing that?
Yeah. In fact, one of the biggest conversations I have with women around, which comes up quite a lot, is around guilt, right? And how they feel guilty
for not doing enough,
for not doing enough around that, not being more of a parent, when they want to have a corporate life, where they feel guilty about wanting to have a corporate life versus also wanting to be a mother. And it's a very real guilt. It's a very real issue.
Yeah.
But is the problem the organization, or is the problem the relationship with the husband?
I think we can't just look at organization. We need to look at the narrative is playing out in the collective consciousness.
Yeah.
In the society, in the world that we live in. It is being incorporated in the structure of the organization. It is also being incorporated in the family unit itself and our daily relationship.
Absolutely.
And even in our relationship with ourselves. How do we feel about ourselves? How do we feel, about yourself being a female? How do you feel about yourself being a black?
Absolutely right. And I think this is a great point. I mean, when you look at married couples in particular, are they having those meaningful conversations where they understand what each wants?
And
what
one
each
of
needs?
the downfall of many relationships that despite they go for many therapy sessions is that they don't address the root issue around the inequality that exists within the relationship.
Yes.
We think that the relationship is equal, that, for example, let's use an even more blunt example. If you're earning, say, maybe $10,000 per month and you're supporting your family, and then you're putting $5,000 in the household, you expect your partner to put $5,002 in the household when she's only earning maybe $3,000.
It's not realistic.
It's not just not realistic, but I'm saying that maybe it's not really, you can't just necessarily use money to just quantify the balance itself.
Yeah.
Maybe, one person can do one more and then the other person can fill in the gaps by doing another more.
And I think you use a really interesting word, balance. What actually creates that balance in a couple? Because it's the same thing in a workforce. What creates that balance in a workforce?
What creates the balance in that workforce or in that couple also show us the imbalances that exist in the undercurrent. The undercurrent, the unsaid, the one that's playing out in the background.
Yeah.
The thing that's causing all the conflicts that they have. Like, there's something that bugs them, but instead of looking into what bugs them, they think it's about them. So I was, it was interesting that we're talking about this because 2 episodes ago, we talked about a very interesting, I play around with a theory with one of the hosts, who was interviewing me. What happens if we begin to allow ourselves to examine the inequalities in those roles that they play? For example, can the man actually play the female role?
Oh,
in that relationship.
Role swapping, yeah.
Can the female play the man role? Because maybe that will give more understanding, more diversity, more inclusivity, where we can begin to accept each other for the importance of each role. The way we quantify value is not necessarily equilateral.
Yes, of course not.
But the assumption is we assume that we are. We assume that we are logical. We assume that we know what's best. But yet the issue continues to persist. Yeah. The divorce rate are increasing.
Why are divorce rates increasing?
Well, I can't really say for individual per se, but as a trend, this has been happening since COVID.
One of the biggest reasons that we hear, right, is financial pressures. That's one of the biggest reasons why we're seeing divorce rates increasing.
Can you tell me more about it?
Pressures for the family to make money, pressures on one member of the family to provide enough for the family, pressures around who gets what money, how they're able to live their lives. They work hard and they can't really spend their money the way they'd like to because it's got to go towards the family. A lot of the divorces are actually contributed. One of the big contributing factors is money. Just like wars. Most wars are typically fought because of money or because of something. Right? So I think this comes back to that point about it's more than just understanding. It's more than just understanding what everyone contributes or how everyone contributes. It's also about appreciating how everyone contributes. So
appreciating the value that every single individual is adding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not necessarily just measured by that one thing that we assume that is equal just because you have the means to do so, you expect the other person to do so. That's an absolute disaster in a relationship recipe. Yeah,
and at a corporate level, I think this is one of the problems is we tend to evaluate people based on how they perform.
How they look, how they perform.
More so on how they perform, right? But we've got to start looking on everything. Like,
how can we lift somebody up?
Yeah.
Without necessarily using the metrics of how we expect ourselves to be, but to be able to neutralize it. Not really support, but lifting them up. How can we create a more uplifting culture?
And I think this is what really good organizations are striving to do, is how do we build that culture where everyone recognizes, understands, and appreciates how every single person is unique and special, how every single person contributes in different ways, right? Just because I contribute my way doesn't mean that everyone else should contribute my way. Everyone has their own value that they bring to the table. So I think understanding that is really key for organizations.
And also at the individual level, how do we devalue ourselves? Maybe you compare yourself with another person because the other person is adding value in a particular way, and then you put yourself lesser, and then you start withdrawing in the relationship itself.
And we see that not just in relationships, but also in the corporate world.
Yeah.
You know, where people do not see themselves as providing as much value, right? And in fact, they feel the opposite. And we see that in a big way. You know, I see it a lot with women, and I would say half of my clients at least are women, where they feel that they can't be as assertive as a male. They feel they can't be as outspoken as a male. If they am outspoken, people will look at me the wrong way. And this is quite often a common thing. If I'm assertive, if I'm aggressive, people will say you shouldn't be assertive and aggressive because you're female. So there's that narrative that we quite often hear
putting people into boxes, but that box is really a category of you're female, you should act in this particular code of conduct. Yeah. You're a man, you should be.
Yeah, and that narrative, I mean, I think a lot of that narrative comes from within.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I've never heard anyone in the workforce say, you're female, you shouldn't be speaking like this.
You haven't?
Never.
I see.
But I'm not a female, right? But I've never heard anyone say this. Doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but I think a lot of these narratives we actually create ourselves. You know, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, on one hand we create ourselves, but on another hand we're drawn to those narratives.
Yes,
it's like
yes.
There are millions of narrative. Why that particular narrative? Why do we get pulled into that narrative? Of course, there's a core issue, like attracts like.
Yeah.
But that means this narrative was already playing, you know, for generations, from our father's time, for our grandfather's time. It's been playing the undercurrent. So how do we begin to dismantle and be free of it if we don't realize that we're playing those roles, we are perpetuating, reinforcing it?
I think this is a really good point, is that people and society as a whole, we've got to learn to detach ourselves from a lot of this stuff. We've got to learn to really sort of open ourselves up to possibilities and not be closed down by, you know, narratives that may or may not be created by us, may be part of a system, right? You know, I think a really important point is, you know, we all have the ability to control what we do. We all have the ability to control how we look at something. You know, some things we might not be able to control, but we can certainly control how it impacts us. We can certainly control how we view it, how we think about it.
Rather than reacting to
it.
We respond.
We're responding in the right sort of way.
Responsibility means the ability to respond to something. If you hear a calling, can you respond back?
I think this is a very important point. You know, and we see it happen a lot in coaching conversations. People bring up topics, you know, that's not in their control. And because it's not in their control, they let it stress them, they let it worry them, and it shifts how they react, right? So the big challenge is getting them to say, hey, let it go. It's not in my control. I can't do anything about that.
What can you do about it?
I can just do about how I look at it and how I view about it, you know, how I feel about it. I think this is a big part to do with DEI, is people just accepting the fact that everyone's different, right? Accepting the fact that every single person can view things in our own way, can respond in our own way rather than react.
Cool. If there's one thing you could change, what would that be?
I would do away with the term DEI altogether.
Tell me more.
I would replace it with do we actually need to label it? Or do we need to live it? I think we label it too much.
I think so too,
Right.
because we don't practice it. We don't
practice it.
we
It's
don't-
just,
we
it's
don't
just a
embody
label.
it.
Yeah. So I think getting rid of that, the actual terms DEI, but just having more meaningful conversations, I think that to me is really, really key. Like for example, we want more women in the workforce. Okay, what do we do to get more women in the workforce? If we have an IT company, what do we do to engage more women? What do we do to get them more involved? Right? Where can we reach out to them? I think we've got to start having those conversations, but not doing it in a way that is at the expense of others. I'm very much against quotas. I think quota systems are, we're seeing quota systems, right? I think quota systems just fundamentally are wrong. You should hire someone because they're the right person for the job, not for any other reason, right? Their age, gender, race, sexual preferences, that doesn't determine whether they're good for a job.
Yeah.
Right.
To label somebody's strength and ability, based on their preferences. That's
absolutely right.
That's quite sweeping.
Yeah. And we've seen with all the psychometric tools that are out there, you've seen that, males, females all possess similar strengths. There is a lot of sort of commonalities between everyone, right? We're all special. We've all got strengths. We've all got our own superpowers. How do you bring that out of people? That to me is one of the big things that we've got to start looking at. So I would do away with any terms about DEI, but I would have very frank conversations about why we're hiring people, what sort of people we need, how can we get different perspectives and viewpoints involved. Different perspectives doesn't necessarily mean hiring different people. It could also mean engaging people for certain types of conversations.
Being open
to stuff, yeah.
So we think that we're open, but we are not. There's a limit to our openness.
We're not.
And I think that could change.
We're not. No.
If we want to progress higher as a society.
How do you change society?
Conversations, awareness around the rank system, the rank structure, even how DEI is a label, but it's not really embodied. There's a gap. There's a translation gap.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not even a translation gap. We're focusing on negatives rather than focusing on positives, I think. I think focusing on positives would be showing how everyone contributes, how everyone has something of value to offer. Yeah, how everyone is unique and special. So I think that's what I would be doing more of, but I would certainly scrap the term DEI. I mean, what's Trump saying? Trump is fundamentally saying that many DEI initiatives are anti-DEI. That's fundamentally what they're trying to say, but they're doing it the wrong way. Threatening people with legal action is just, that's the Donald Trump, my stick is bigger than your stick sort of approach, which will get you only so far in life, although it seems to get him quite far. So we're just talking about DEI and some of the failings of DEI. And don't get me wrong, it's not just all failings. We are seeing a lot of success with DEI. We are seeing more women into certain sectors. The STEM sector is seeing more women. We're starting to see more women at board level, although still vastly unrepresented, right? And I think one of the big questions is, where does DEI go from here? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Contrary to what you just presented, that we should dismantle, because now it's really a hot topic and it's like on a hot seat right now. I wouldn't recommend dismantling it, but how can we build more consciousness around this whole thing? Okay. Since the masses awareness are right now looking at that, to use that as a platform or opportunity for education. How can we create more meaningful conversations around the rank structures so that we can be more aware of how we are doing that or doing less of that in our daily life, and how we are contributing to the inequality as a whole itself. So what I think is a very simple approach. It's more of a guerrilla approach whereby we just, let's talk about this. How can we be more of an embodiment of DEI rather than talking that the company practice it, because you and the company are two different things. Who runs the company? You.
Yeah, so I think this is the key thing, right? Which is if we're labeling it DEI, then I feel it becomes more like tokenism, right? In that we're doing it because we have to.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a corporate initiative. That's not the right reasons to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
You should do it because you believe in the values of
absolutely,
it. Rather than, amalgamating because the company say that you need to, it's a perfect protocol, you're going to do it.
Absolutely right. And I think this is really, really key is, coming down to this piece around, once again, I bring it back to this point, every single person on this planet is special, is amazing in their own way. Every single person on this planet has good points. They also have their own demons. Every single person has good narratives. They all have negative narratives as well.
Light, shadow, good, evil.
Yeah, it exists in every single person. There's not a single person on this planet who hasn't done wrong. Right? There's not a single person on this planet that is, the embodiment of Mother Teresa. I mean, even Mother Teresa does things wrong. Right? I think the key thing is being really open to who we are, being open to how we show up, being open to talking about what we believe in, what we don't believe in, being open to other people's viewpoints, other people's perspectives. Just because you look at things through a different lens from me, does that mean you're wrong? Does that mean I'm right? No, it doesn't. It just means we look at it through different lenses, and we experience things in different ways.
Inclusivity, openness, willingness, receptiveness.
That's what real inclusivity is. Real inclusivity is accepting the fact that, hey, we're all different. We're all special. We all have our own superpowers.
So it's like, since we have a whiteboard.
Oh, we have a whiteboard. Ah.
So it's more like, right now the way we look at things is you're here, the other person is here.
Yeah. Or collectives.
Yeah. So it's always two-way.
Yeah.
But what if we stand beside each other to look at this way?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how would that change relationship, the way we relate with the world?
But even when we stand side by side, we still look through different lenses.
We still look through different lenses, and yet
we still see different things.
Yeah. And yet, if we can allow inclusivity to happen, maybe we begin to see this thing called the truth.
What is the truth?
What is the truth? He sees this and he thinks that he's right. He sees things and he thinks that he's right.
Yeah.
But both of them are right. But yet, they're only right because of the lens that they wear.
So they see the truth through their own lens.
Okay.
So through my lens, this is the truth.
Which kind of brings the equation around reality versus actuality. What is actual and what's real to this person is different from this person.
Yeah.
But what's actually the truth?
And what is actually the truth?
Well, I'm beginning to scratch the surface.
Go deeper. Tell me.
About?
The truth and actuality.
What would you like to know?
Where would you start?
Do we need to start? It's always there.
Okay. Elaborate more.
Reality is what's real to you.
What's real to you?
But what's real to you might not be real to another person.
What about actuality?
Actuality, we're talking about what's actually happening.
But what's actually happening to you is not necessarily what's actually happening to me.
Correct. But I'm not talking about in that sense. I mean what's actually happening in the world. So in relation to the truth, in relativity to the truth. Because the closer your reality is to actuality, that's where manifestation is going to happen instantaneously. Things just happen. You can't really explain it. You don't have to explain it because it just works in magic. And most people give up trying to understand it because they think that it's beyond them. But it's really, and what do we need to do inner work? We're cleaning out the shit, the filters that cloud our lenses. so that we can begin to see things for what it is, so that we can begin to orient ourselves in relation to the truth, rather than the delusion in our head that we believe to be real. Because what's real for you is not real for another person, and it's not the same as what's actually happening in reality.
You said clearing out the filters.
Yeah.
The lenses. Where do people need to start clearing out the lenses when it comes to DEI?
Well, first thing we talked about was the inequality that exists, the rank system, the rank structures that exist in the fabrics, not just in the society, but also in our daily relationship.
Yep.
Even with ourselves. Realizing the limits of our openness, that we're actually not open. You're open until you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And then being able to change your position, your role in life. Why are we looking at something in this particular way? Why don't we move our position to here so that we can begin to experience what this person is actually experiencing? And then, of course, have this person play this role too. So we call that role work, role play.
Yeah.
And I feel this is going to bring more awareness in our society rather than demolishing this whole thing around DEI. It is not effective, but what is causing the lack of embodiment because people don't see how it works. They don't know how to work. And maybe if we do that, we can find more solution to our daily problems. Because the problems that you experience in your life is not meant to stop you, it's for you to transcend. And this could be a different approach. Besides solving DEI, but open up more possibilities for people.
If you were to make this very, very tangible for people out there.
So there's a few around me.
Yeah.
There's a few around you.
Yeah.
Me going to your field.
I understand that. Yep.
Is different.
I understand that. Yeah.
Okay. And then you coming to my field to experience that is different. And how do we both transcend that relationship itself?
Yep.
To realize what you value. I can't devalue what you value.
Yeah.
Just because I value something different, but to be able to see each other's at the same lens.
How would you do that in a corporate setting?
Process work.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on that for people?
I recommend process work,
What does process work actually look like? Because we hear this term quite a lot.
You hear this word quite a lot.
Process work is a term that's shared around quite a lot, and there seems to be different definitions around it and different thoughts on what process work is.
I see.
So I'd love to hear what you feel process work is for people.
Can you share with me what have you heard so far?
Process work is around processing feelings, emotions, experiences, and sharing those feelings, emotions, experiences. That's one of the ways that's always been explained to me.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I will just show this so that there's a picture that's taken. Okay, so I'm going to erase the whiteboard. So, I'm getting a bit excited, even though I need to use the washroom, around process work. Process work isn't just about processing your feelings, because feelings is only one small part of ourselves.
Yes.
There's also the physicality of it. There's also the totality of it. Emotional, mental, spiritual. Basically, the process body.
Yep.
How do we process things? How do we, we have symptoms, that we experience in our body. How do we decipher the feedback that our body is telling us? Whether something is good for us, something is bad for us. How do we go deep into it? How do we allow ourselves to, be detached from what we're attached to? Just like be detached to the fixation of how the narrative of the world has been playing out, to allow ourselves to explore different role. So I disagree that process work is about feeling, because feeling is
one aspect of it. Yeah,
correct.
Yeah,
and feelings are fleeting. It always changes like a wave.
Yep.
Like the tides in the ocean.
Yep.
Whereas process work is really about how do we process information and experiences and to make sense out of it that's unique to us. Like for example, this thing has been flirting with me on air. And if I were to just tune in without making any judgments, why is it flirting with me? So I play around with it. Okay, there's something about the red that's calling, but it's not really red, it's salmon color. But this on-air thing is kind of a contrary to how I feel right now, because I'm feeling not very well, so I feel like being bogged down. And that's actually the state that I want to be in. That's why it's flirting with me. I now understand why it's flirting with me. But you see, most people would think that all these little things that catch our awareness, we deem it as meaningless.
Yeah.
So we don't even bother toying around with it, even
Don't
for a
explore it.
moment. Because we keep telling ourselves that it's meaningless, it's useless, we shouldn't waste time. But that was what I did. I just did the process. That was in 30 seconds. Being in tune to the message that my body actually needs. Where in my life do I need more air? Oh, wait a minute. A memory just hit. I started getting a tummy ache this morning because the fan was blown right at my face.
Yep.
And right now, as I'm talking about this, my body physically is churning. I need to use the washroom to get it out of my system. Suddenly, I feel a little bit liberated. Just a little bit. And yet, I can still feel something down here. So let me amplify it and let it unfold. I breathe into it. I let it, okay, when I do that, my headache started coming back. I started feeling bogged back. What is it that is bogging me down? At my high heart area. I got it. What a challenging topic that we're talking about today. Because on one hand, I can say I not from a corporate background. I run my businesses. I take over companies. That's what I do. But when you ask me about frameworks like this, I want to say that I haven't seen really people in a company that truly embody it. So I don't really buy into that. I think it's a good marketing stunt. It's good as a culture. But the problem is there's always a translation gap that they don't embody this culture that they're preaching, because there's a gap itself. And I feel that today what I can add value is really about how do we bridge the embodiment of it. So rather than talking about DEI as a theory, I practice DEI, your company practice DEI, but how do you embody it in your daily life? Not just in your company, but in every part of your role, even in your role with your spouse, your role with your kids. How do you embody that? Because if you notice, all this upbringing comes from young. Like, for example, why do we think certain races are less than or more than?
It's come from somewhere.
It comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
As a kid, you watch your parents behave and act. And then, of course, their parents behave in a different way too. So it becomes a spillover. And we call that a collective trauma that needs to be broken.
Yeah.
And I think that's where process will allow us to detach from whatever we are experiencing or doing, so that we can begin to examine what matters and what is more we need in our life, what is less we need in our life. And I wonder what kind of culture can we incorporate and create if people embrace more diversity, if people embrace more unique individuality into this work that we're doing to make this world a better place. So that we begin to have a more efficient, effective economy, culture, which is what most people will try to quantify in a tangible way, but more fulfillment in people feeling that they are part of something, because your work is not just your work, but it's a practice towards everything in your life. It's a personal mastery. Does it make sense?
Yeah. I mean, look, as humans, we tend to the road of least resistance. Right?
Yeah.
So we tend to opt for whatever's easiest, whatever's quickest.
Especially if the path was really constructed for maybe 200 years, 300 years, naturally people will go into there. So do we have the awareness to stop ourselves? Don't go into there. Awareness. Let me go into it. Tune into it. Something's flirting here.
Yep.
Let's play with it.
So let's try and make this really, really practical for a second, right? And I'm not saying that it's not practical, but imagine you've got an organization's got 30, 40, 50,000 employees. How do we take this process work to an organization?
Well, first and foremost, you need to bring in qualified process work teachers, into the space itself.
Okay.
To conduct maybe a training. Because right now we're talking theories. Until they experience it themselves, they can replicate
Of course,
it.
of course.
So the first point of contact is important, of experiencing it.
Yep.
And how do we, instead of keep relying on the same causes again and again, how can we use that one experiences and create a practice out of it, create a culture out of it, create a system out of it, such that the company is operating based on the system of Tao rather than the system of one person's agenda.
Yep.
Because really, if you really understand company, most company doesn't care about the employees. Most people doesn't care about the clients as well. They're only concerned about the stakeholders.
I would challenge that quite a lot because there's a lot of organizations out there that do care. There are a lot of organizations out there that do care about their people. There are a lot of organizations that do care about their customers, but they also have to struggle with the realities of being in business and making money. So I don't think it's fair to say to label all companies and say, hey, they're all like this, because they're not.
I'm not talking about individuals per se. I'm talking about the people who manage it at the highest level.
Yeah,
naturally, the first interest will be the stakeholders, because the stakeholders is what is funding the company.
That's their job. But I think there's a lot of good leaders out there. I think there's a lot of caring leaders out there. I think there's a lot of leaders out there. And I was just reading a case study this morning, and I forgot the name of the company, but it's a financial institution. When 7-Eleven hit, the CEO of the company was taking his child to school. That company lost 600 employees.
You mean 9/11?
During 9/11.
Got it.
Right? Company lost 600 employees during 9/11. The only reason the CEO wasn't one of them was because he took his son to school. That CEO pledged, right, 20% of the company's profits to go for those families. He didn't have to do that. That was an inherently good initiative. And he's given over $250 million to those people that were lost during 9/11. So I think there's a lot of good people out there. I think there's a lot of leaders that care. But there's also the reality. There's also leaders that care more about the financial. So I think there's a mixture of both.
Well, can I challenge it a little bit?
Sure.
First and foremost, we don't know that person in person. He could be doing out of guilt of the fact that, he wasn't there for his employees. And I'm not saying that whatever he's doing is not good. It's a great piece of work to support the families, to support those lost ones. But unless we are there with them, we don't really know what they're going through.
Yeah.
And it's quite traumatic if you think about it. And you spend your life kind of blaming yourself because you know that you're supposed to be there, but you're not there. And somehow you were there, you kind of escaped death, but you lost all your army. It's quite a very conflicting and defeating position to be in. Traumatic. That's trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he made a choice.
He did.
And his choice was to contribute 25% of the company's profits to those people.
Is the company still operational?
Yeah, company does. The company now employs 57 family members of those deceased family members.
What a meaningful project.
I mean, and I think there are some very good leaders out there. For whatever reasons, they've made a decision, but they've chosen to act.
Yeah.
They've chosen to do something that is, I don't want to say it's right, but they've chosen to do something that's good. Right. So I think there's a lot of leaders that out there that are like that. I think there's a lot of leaders that want to be like that as well. I think there's a lot of organizations that want to be more diverse, want to be more inclusive, but it's not always that easy. And I wish it was as black and white. It's not.
It's always a gray area.
It's a really big gray area.
Yeah.
And I suppose the really important, some of the questions we've got to look at is, how do we as individuals, how do we open ourselves up to being more inclusive? How do we as in organizations, how do we be more diverse, inclusive and equitable in our organizations?
Yeah.
And how do we as a society become more diverse, inclusive and equitable as a society? And it's not something that's going to change. I mean, look, you are fighting human nature, right? It's not something that's just started. This is something that dates back throughout history.
Yeah.
So it's a huge challenge. I suppose some of the key things we've got to start asking is, if we really truly believe in DEI, and I mean believe in DEI, right? Honestly value DEI. If we really truly believe in DEI, what should we as individuals start doing more of, or stop doing? And what should we as organizations start doing?
So let's talk about individuals.
Yeah.
I think we have to realize how that plays out, not just in the role that you play at work, but it plays out in all parts of your life.
Yeah.
And how that's going to forward your relationship with more diversity, more inclusivity, more equanimity as well. Of course, equality.
Yeah.
Okay. To realize that, your relational problems, the way you perceive it, is a function and a byproduct of the societal conditioning in the collective consciousness that runs in the undercurrent. as a society itself, how can we embody more of that? More awareness of how we are playing that in our personal life, and how there's a detachment, or rather a dissociation, between your role in the corporate versus being embodying it. You need to start seeing the direct impacts of how DEI is going to impact your, not just your work life, but every part of your life. I think it's really about a function of value. They don't see the true value. That's why they can't harmonize with it. Then the question is, are we translating DEI really properly? Where's the gap in the communication? What's the gap in showing the value? Why do people not feel the same way?
Where do you think the gap is right now?
Personal opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the gap is people don't see that how it's tied to all their problems in their life.
Okay.
Because if they start seeing the connection to things, then chances are they're going to act upon it. The reason why they are not acting upon it is because they don't see how it connects with any parts of it. That means they don't understand what DEI really is, despite the information out there. So the question is, how can we make it more educationable? Part of education.
So there's an individual responsibility.
I feel that is the easiest way and the fastest way and the most efficient way to get a group of collective, to really practice it is through individual. And of course, imagine you practice it individually. At a structural point, the company also practice and embody it, and the work culture also embody it. It makes changes really rapid and fast.
So it's about, if I'm hearing right, it's about creating a movement.
A movement, a culture. Rather than talking at a administration level, policy level, let's talk about it at an even more intimate level, closer to the ground. Because right now the paper is there on air, but on the ground, it's pretty far.
So having more of these conversations, not necessarily in the workplace, but
in our daily life.
In our daily lives.
In our daily life with our partners, our spouse, our children, our friends. Sunday coffee, what do you talk about?
Who won the football?
Oh, who won the football? Yeah.
So if you were to give advice to people that wanted to, really try and understand DEI a bit better at an individual level, what advice would you give them?
Start looking into your daily relationship. Start from the relationship that matters to you.
Yep.
Where is the inequality in that relationship? Where is the lack of diversity playing out in those roles that you have in those relationships? Where in your life is there a lack of inclusivity? Where in your life, in that relationship itself, there is a missing, value of the way we perceive things? And I feel that's a good way to keep it going, keep the conversation going, bring it to the even more intimate level. Instead of talking about DEI at the company level, let's talk about our daily relationship. DEI, relationship.
And where does the process work fit into that?
It fits anywhere.
Yeah. So if
because process work is not just a group thing, it's not just a individual thing. It happens every moment.
So would I be right in saying, if I understand you correctly, as individuals, start spending more time or reflecting on everything that happens.
Reflect on everything that happened.
Not just the mental, but really how we're feeling about it physically, where we're feeling about it, what sort of emotions are coming up, how it links to our beliefs, whatever belief systems that we have. Really spending a bit of time to really try and connect the dots.
Connect the dots, yeah.
Right? But that's an individual level. But then in our couples work, right, whether it be with your partner or whatever, really spending a bit more time to understand not just what they say, but the emotions that they experience, where they feel it physically, how it links to their beliefs. Is that my understanding correct?
Correct. And of course, making those changes, because we can talk about it, but if we can't see the same thing as both people, then there's going to be a gap. So working with a intermediary, a translator or a mediator is going to be very effective. Somebody who is trained in therapy or process work is going to be able to help them bridge the gap. So that as long as they see the results in the relationship how it forwards, the more they're going to practice it on their daily life, the more they're going to start seeing how it's going to be incorporated and embodied in their relationship at work. And that's how we build cultures. We build from people.
So this is the pragmatist in me. There's 6.5 billion people on this planet. How many process work therapists are there around the world?
Probably less than 1%.
Probably less than 1%, right?
Correct. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do is to actually push out process work so that, more people can actually hear of it, know of it, and act upon it. Because it's a very great tool for conflict resolution. Because this is a conflict. This is a conflict between
different ideas,
different relations, different abstracts.
Different ideas. Narratives.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we talked about earlier on was DEI and some of the failings of DEI.
Yeah.
And one of those failures that I see is particularly around changing that mindset of people.
Yeah.
Where do you think we're going wrong with changing those mindsets?
Let's talk a little bit about the training curriculum of what's out there. I think just when we talk about it, what's out there is really a one-day workshop. People attend a one-day workshop and then you expect them to be able to embody and practice that. That's bullshit.
You're absolutely right. We're one company or one of this, one of that. I mean, does a one-day workshop change people's innate nature?
And the funny thing is, the people who are teaching the trainers might not be the best person. They might not even be adequate enough to be talking about DEI, not unless they are an expert in that. They're a specialist in that. And so it's funny, you have a group of people who is being taught by someone who doesn't know shit. It's going to spread even more ignorance.
But it's a really important question. Who is a specialist in DEI?
There's no...
I don't think there is a specialist in DEI, is there? I mean...
Is there one in the market right now?
What makes someone a DEI specialist?
Somebody who is able to embody and practice equality, diversity, inclusivity, deep democracy in different parts of their life, not just as a career, not just as a mask, not just as a suit, costume, but being able to embody that, with their being trained in that, to be able to facilitate that. I think if that is what is missing, then maybe the education part hasn't been formulated.
So it's about embodiment.
Embodiment, and how do we process those things? How do we begin to realize and open our awareness?
Where does embodiment come from?
That could be a workshop you run to corporate.
Where does embodiment come from?
It comes from who you are within.
Okay, so it comes from who you are from within.
Correct.
Right? So how then, if it comes from who I am within, how then can attending a training class impact who I am from within?
You're full of shit. You're a layer with many shit. You're a layer with many filters. We need to first unpeel the different layers so that you gain clarity of who you are and what you are not. What you think you are now may not be necessarily what your true values actually embody. So it requires a lot of introspection and self-examination, which is what we do in inner work.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm just, as I'm having this conversation with you, I realize this is an untapped market. That, no one is practicing DEI properly because no one is qualified to train them. So they look at it as a theoretical framework. But what if we design a system around it?
So I think you nailed something on the point, which is a framework. Does frameworks change mindsets?
Not exactly.
No, I mean, we talked about this in Singapore. I mean, in Singapore, we have
thousands, millions of frameworks.
Yeah, absolutely. We have frameworks galore, right? We have a quota system in our HDB blocks where to try and create diversity in HDB blocks. Do we really see diversity in HDB blocks? Generally, no. Right? Well, at least from my experience.
Even from an urban planning point, different races, religions of people tend to
congregate around certain areas, right? Similar things happen in Australia as well. So I think it comes back to this point, which is, if we really want to not change people, but
we have to begin to truly accept ourselves for who we are, not just from a mental framework, but from being free emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually, to be able to detach ourselves from all these attachments and roles that we automatically just inhibit like animals, to be able to free ourselves to be more human being. Human becoming more of a human. To realize that no matter which part of the world you are in, there's always going to be this gap. And what can you do on your part to bridge this gap? How can you show more compassion? How can you heal the divide?
So when I hear you say that, certain things resonate with me, certain things don't. Right? So intellectually, I can understand it. Emotionally, I can connect with it. Spiritually, I struggle with that personally.
Okay.
Right? And I think this is one of the challenges is, the fact that, and I'm a fairly experienced coach, right? But that spirituality piece and getting in touch with my spirituality is not something that I'm used to, right? So I can see that itself could be challenging for a lot of people.
Then let's just start with physically, emotionally, mentally.
Start somewhere.
Ultimately, to realize something spiritually has nothing to do with religion, because religion is also part of that whole inequality, you know. But to realize we're all spiritual beings having human experience. That there's
spiritual beings having human experience.
That there's divinity in each one of them. Question is, can you recognize your own value? Can you recognize your own worth? Can you recognize your own divinity? And I guess, it starts from there, To solve an issue, we cannot just look at the issue. We need a different approach, an unconventional approach.
So I'm starting to see how this could unfold in terms of DEI type training.
Yeah.
Right? Because most of the DEI training that we hear is stats being shared, quotas being shared, talking about rules and policies, which people attend a workshop, tick it off. Okay, I've attended that workshop.
Falling asleep.
But then go back to their usual self.
Of course.
Right?
Because it's just another certificate.
So we need to, well, it's not even a certificate, right? It's a checkbox. And I think this is something that we need to sort of start addressing is if we really want to embrace DEI,
we just start taking this more seriously.
How do we start having real meaningful conversations? How do we,
can we invite the education?
Yeah, well, that too. How can we invite introspection, into our daily lives?
And diversity, openings. Yeah.
If we were to summarize what we've discussed over the last hour and a half, what would be some of the key takeaways from your point of view?
To solve any big issues, societal problems, it comes from within. It starts from you. So look into your life. What needs to be worked on? When your life needs to have more openness and diversity, equality, and also inclusivity. Look into your openness, because there's a limit to our openness, as much as we claim that we're open as a person. And then we hit an edge, and then we stop. Most people doesn't know or have the tools to circumvent their edges. So fundamental thing, go back to yourself. What would it be like if you were being treated as the oppressed one by the oppressor? And perhaps that might put you into a different perspective by being able to alternate the roles and to be able to alternate the roles enough until the role is dismantled.
Can we change one term?
Sure.
Do people deliberately set out to oppress?
But the undercurrent is always the oppressor oppressed.
Yeah, but is
power dynamic?
It might be a power dynamic, but is it intentional? Or is it part of...
It doesn't matter anymore because it's part of the whole undercurrent narrative.
So if we were to change it to a more positive word rather than oppress, what might be a more positive word?
Well, just speak as it is. Because that's the most obvious things that we need to address. The power dynamic, the rank structure. And the rank structure is not a bad thing. It's being able to be fluid enough to know when you are oppressed, when you are the oppressor. Because when you do that whole thing to another person, that's what they feel. Chances are they feel repressed. They feel oppressed too. Step into the shoe of the other person. How would they feel?
Yep.
Being in an environment where there's a lack of diversity.
So let's just say for a second, before we sort of wrap up, say for a second, I get promoted into a role, into a senior leadership role. Does that make me the oppressor?
Not necessary, because that is a role thing. But we're talking about when it's man oppressor oppressed, we're talking about the undercurrent.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So it's when someone is put in a position of power at someone else's expense.
No, I'm not talking in terms of role or ranks.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the undercurrent where we automatically just move ourselves into those roles without consciously realizing that we're playing that role to another person.
Okay, all right, I see.
Yeah.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So when we sort of unconsciously do
Yeah, it's like unconsciously your
Okay.
shortest path, you just gravitate into that.
Okay, I get that. You asked what would I call a DEI initiative if I was to change DEI?
Yeah.
And I think how I would change it is it starts with you. So rather than call it DEI initiative, right, I think it should be more about, and it starts with you initiative, which is if we want equality, if we want fairness, if we want diversity in this world, it starts with you. It doesn't start with any quota system. It doesn't start with any frameworks. It doesn't start with any structures. It starts with you being able to look inwards, you being able to introspect on who you are, what you stand for, what you believe in, what's meaningful to you. You know, that introspection about how your role within the universe. I think that's the term for DEI's replacement.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jim, for having me.
And on that note, we are finished with this episode of
Clean Your Toilet.
Clean Your Toilet.